It's the most annoying feeling. You just bought a new interface and you want to keep your old interface just in case, but now you have two interfaces and you wish there was a way to use both interfaces instead of having to get an external preamp. Or maybe you have something like a Helix or a Quad Cortex and you wish there was a way to use less cables from one device to the other. In this video, I'm going to let you in on a little secret on how you can connect both devices so you can use them at the same time. Now let's get into it. So the way we're going to connect two devices is by using something called an aggregate device. For this video, I'm going to be doing it in Mac. And if you want to see a video on how this could be done on a PC, let me know in the comments by typing Microsoft. So when we go into the applications on Mac, we're going to scroll down to utilities and then we're going to click on audio MIDI setup. When you select audio MIDI setup, if you only see MIDI Studio, go up to window and select show audio devices. And this is going to show every audio device you have available at this moment in time. What we need to do is we need to go down here to the bottom left and click on this plus sign. And we're going to create an aggregate device. So the way this aggregate device is going to work is we want to select the device that we're adding to our setup first, and then we'll select our main interface as the second device. So the way we do this is we just click the check mark right next to the Quad Cortex that we're going to use in this example. And then I'm going to go down here to Orion HD USB, and that's going to be my second device that I'm going to use for this aggregate device. The next thing we want to do with this aggregate device is we want to make sure the clock source is set to the secondary device. So in this case, it would be the Quad Cortex. If you have another interface, it would be the second interface that you're adding, or a Helix or an Axe-Fx, whatever the case may be. And the next thing to note is if drift correction is on for the interface. All drift correction means is that it's going to make sure that there's no clocking drift between the Quad Cortex in this example and the Orion. So now we have these devices set up. Let's really fast rename this so that we don't get confused later on when we go into Pro Tools or whatever your interface may be. You're going to enter. Now before we go any further, let's talk about the inputs and the outputs of the aggregate device. And this can be a little confusing, so I'm going to try to go slow, but if you need to, rewind it so you can make sure that you follow along. So for this example, I'm using the Quad Cortex and I'm using my Antelope Orion interface. Quad Cortex has 8 inputs and outputs, and my Antelope Orion has 64 inputs and 64 outputs. This might be different based on what you're using and what you're connecting together, but it's important to know how many inputs and outputs are available on both devices, because that's going to show up right here in your input channels and your output channel. And because we're adding the Quad Cortex, the way it works with the aggregate device, those inputs and outputs on that device are going to be the primary or first that we're going to see, and then our main interface is going to be the secondary. So in this case, inputs 1 through 8 are coming through the Cortex, and then inputs 9 through 72 are coming through the Antelope Orion for my particular case. For you, it's going to be whatever interfaces you are attaching. And then on the outputs, because the Cortex has 8 outputs, we see 8 outputs from the Cortex, and then 9 through 72 are going to be the Antelope Orion. If you had an ID14 and a Quad Cortex, they would read differently, but it's important to know, again, how many inputs and outputs you have. Now that we have the aggregate device created, and now we have the clocking all set, let's go into Pro Tools and select this device. Before we go into Pro Tools, I wanted to show you a quick example of knowing how many inputs and outputs your device has when you're connecting multiple devices. So in this example, I still have the Quad Cortex as my second device, and it's the primary here in the inputs and outputs, but I'm using my Rodecaster Pro as the main interface device, but I'm using it in multi-channel mode. And as you can see, there is no outputs for the Rodecaster, but I have 4 additional inputs. So this is crucial to know so that when I'm running audio, the outputs are going to come out of the Quad Cortex and I won't be able to do it through the Rodecaster. So it's just important to know, again, those input and output configurations. Now let's go into Pro Tools. So this example is going to be in Pro Tools, but this would be however you set up your I/O and whatever digital audio workstation you're working through. In my case, I'm going to go to Setup, Playback Engine, and I'm going to scroll down until I find the Cortex Orion. I'm going to select that, hit yes, hit OK. So now our audio device is the aggregate device that we created. And if we scroll down and we go to inputs, you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is the Quad Cortex. And then everything else right here is coming in from the Antelope Orion. And when we go to outputs, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9 and 10, which are going to be our 1 and 2 outputs for the Orion, which is what we're going to want to select. And now would be a great time to go and change the name of the inputs and the outputs so it doesn't get confusing. If you made it this far and enjoyed the video, do us a favor and boot that like button below for the almighty YouTube algorithm. We'd greatly appreciate it, and we'll see you in the next video.